1 minute ago, Jada Pinkett Smith exposes Diddy's disturbing loyalty contract. The courtroom held its collective breath as an unforeseen development shattered the monotony of legal proceedings. The name Jada Pinkett Smith rang out, cutting through the stillness like a crack of thunder. The acclaimed actress, businesswoman, and wife of Will Smith rose and approached the stand with solemn poise. Her demeanor was composed, but her eyes betrayed the weight of what she was about to share. What followed was not just testimony. It was a revelation that would ripple far beyond the confines of that courtroom. Jada began her account by revealing a chilling episode that dated back to 2004. She claimed that Sean "Diddy" Combs had summoned her for a private discussion, ostensibly to explore a charitable partnership. But what awaited her at that meeting was not philanthropy. It was something far more ominous. According to her, Diddy presented her with a document not bound by legal jargon or corporate insignias. This wasn't a contract in the traditional sense. It was, in her words, a spiritual agreement, a deeply unsettling manuscript cloaked in mystery and coercion. When she declined to sign, Jada recounted Diddy locked eyes with her and uttered a sentence that would haunt her for years. "You'll regret it in the next life." The courtroom buzzed with unease. Gasps punctuated the air. Even seasoned prosecutors seemed taken aback, as though her appearance had been a last-minute decision of immense personal consequence. Dressed in muted black, Jada delivered her testimony with a steady voice, laying bare a secret she'd guarded for nearly 2 decades. She described following the current case closely from afar, tuning into the testimonies of others who had encountered similarly disturbing behavior accounts of pressure-veiled threats and cryptic documents. And in those accounts, she recognized echoes of her own past. "I saw the tip of something I didn't understand," she told the court. "But now I see the whole iceberg." Jada's words drew a line between personal trauma and a systemic pattern. Her description of the 2004 meeting painted a picture of ritualistic precision. The location was a luxury suite at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. Jazz music played softly. Curtains-drawn lights dimmed. Diddy, dressed entirely in white, offered champagne, an offer she declined. The tone was serene, almost ceremonial, as if orchestrated to mask the true nature of the encounter. From behind a sleek bar, Diddy produced a black leather folder. Inside, Jada found a document unlike anything she had seen, titled "Loyalty Agreement." It spanned several pages but lacked any official formatting. It carried no lawyer's stamp, no company header. And yet the language within was chillingly precise, demanding lifelong silence and unwavering compliance. She recalled one passage that spoke of submission of the soul to the greater good of the legacy. Others referenced unnamed individuals, rituals, and dire consequences for defiance. To her, it felt ancient, almost mythological, a pact designed not just to secure discretion, but to bind allegiance in perpetuity. There was no request for money. No rights were exchanged, just loyalty. Absolute, unbreakable, eternal. And her name was already printed on the signature line. Jada said she returned the folder without signing. That moment, she explained, marked a transformation in Diddy's demeanor. The calm exterior vanished, replaced by a shadow of something darker. He leaned forward and repeated his eerie warning, "You'll regret it in the next life." The air in the courtroom was thick with disbelief. Jada continued, saying she had committed portions of the document to memory, despite its mysterious disappearance from her home years later. Some phrases haunted her in dreams. "The undersigned agrees to uphold confidentiality not only in this life, but in all spiritual transitions thereafter," she quoted. Another clause cautioned, "Any knowledge gained in sacred space shall remain sacred, never to be uttered in earthly court, church, or public sphere." She had laughed nervously when she first read those words. But Diddy hadn't laughed. He simply nodded and said, "You're starting to get it." The gallery sat riveted, unsure whether they were hearing the script of a psychological thriller or the buried truth of a powerful man's empire. But this was just the beginning. As Jada Pinkett Smith delved deeper into her testimony, the courtroom transformed from a place of judgment into a crucible of revelation. She wasn't simply recounting an odd encounter, she was peeling back layers of a mechanism that seemed designed to instill fear, enforce loyalty, and isolate those who resisted. The alleged meeting took place in 2004, but the psychological residue had never left her. Jada described the moment when Diddy handed her the leather-bound folder as eerily premeditated. It wasn't business, she emphasized. It felt like initiation. The room's setting, the dim light, the soft jazz, the way Diddy's every movement seemed rehearsed, was curated to lower defenses and suggest intimacy. But what it delivered was intimidation cloaked in sophistication. She remembered the physicality of the folder, the grain of the leather, the sharp edges of the paper inside. It was as if the document itself had been constructed to intimidate. She paraphrased another section aloud. To break silence is to break the bond. Breaking the bond carries consequences divine and otherwise. Jada recalled the blood running cold in her veins as she read. This wasn't a typical non-disclosure agreement. It was a contract of control, spiritual, psychological, and existential. And it didn't ask for protection. It demanded submission. The courtroom grew quieter still as she described how the document made references to levels of loyalty, the selection and gatherings, all without elaboration. These vague, almost cult-like terms implied a larger structure, something systematic and hidden in plain sight. When she refused to sign, Diddy allegedly warned her again, "You'll regret it in the next life." It was the second time he said it, and this time it wasn't just unnerving, it felt like a ritualistic incantation. Jada wasn't sure whether the threat was physical, spiritual, or symbolic, but she knew he meant it. She testified that she left the hotel in a daze, hands trembling, barely able to insert her car key. That single moment of refusal didn't bring her peace. It brought years of silent dread. She began to sense that she hadn't just declined a bizarre offer. She had narrowly escaped something insidious. The silence that followed her refusal wasn't comforting. It was menacing. Over the years, Jada noticed changes. Promising roles vanished without explanation. Collaborations fizzled out mysteriously, and some of her peers grew distant. She began to wonder, was this coincidence, or the quiet machinery of retaliation? What haunted her even more was the growing pattern she started to see among other women in the industry. Those who seemed once full of promise quietly disappeared from public life. Some still orbited Diddy's world, often with eyes that seemed vacant in photographs. Others stopped speaking altogether. The folder, the phrase, the hollow gaze they became, signs she subconsciously scanned for at every high-profile gathering. She admitted she began to journal obsessively, trying to make sense of it all, until fear overtook her, and she destroyed the writings. "I didn't even tell Will," she revealed to the courtroom. "Not for years. I couldn't explain it. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Until this trial." When she heard the testimonies of dancers' assistants and collaborators describing non-disclosure agreements laced with esoteric language, veiled threats, and spiritual undertones, she realized her experience wasn't isolated. It was systemic. "It wasn't just me," she told the jury. "He was doing this to everyone." By choosing to speak now, Jada wasn't just defending herself. She was exposing what she believed to be a sophisticated structure of fear, masquerading as opportunity, a net cast wide across the industry. The atmosphere inside the courtroom grew increasingly charged as Jada Pinkett Smith's testimony unfolded with disturbing clarity. What had begun as a personal account now sounded more like a blueprint, one that mirrored the experiences of others caught in Diddy's orbit. Jada detailed how over the years she began piecing together a pattern of subtle coercion and invisible punishment. It wasn't always overt. There were no shouted threats or dramatic confrontations. Instead, there was a quiet, consistent erosion of opportunities, of connections, of safety. She watched peers vanish from the spotlight. Some stopped giving interviews. Others seemed uncomfortable in public, especially near Diddy. There were those who said yes, she told the court, solemnly. And you could tell? They never looked the same afterward. She began to suspect that what she had encountered wasn't just an isolated experience, but part of an elaborate system built on intimidation and manipulation. She described moments at award shows and galas where women would exchange quick, haunted glances when Diddy walked into the room. A shared look, she said, of unspoken understanding. The realization grew heavier when she heard the term loyalty agreement, again, not from her own memory, but from the mouths of others. Former employees and collaborators spoke of similar folders, similar phrases, and the same chilling sense of being ensnared in something intangible, yet deeply binding. Prosecutors soon introduced 2 physical exhibits, documents recovered during broader investigations into Diddy's business dealings. One was reportedly given to a former assistant in 2007, the other to a touring dancer in 2010. Though formatted differently and varying in language, both shared shocking parallels with Jada's story. They contained clauses about eternal silence, spiritual allegiances, and penalties for disobedience cloaked in metaphorical terms. The courtroom turned cold as jurors examined these documents. A forensic handwriting analyst was brought forward to assess handwritten notes and symbols found on all 3 agreements, including Jada's recollected version. The expert testified that the annotations, especially a recurring emblem resembling an eye within a circle, bore striking resemblance to Diddy's handwriting. Jada identified the symbol without hesitation. "He told me it was the Watcher," she said, her voice unwavering. "He said it would protect him and punish those who betrayed the mission." Diddy's defense team immediately objected, calling the documents fraudulent and accusing the prosecution of conspiracy. But the judge overruled. The consistent themes corroborating accounts and forensic evidence warranted further scrutiny. The impact on the room was visceral. One spectator fainted and had to be escorted out. This was no longer about celebrity gossip. It had evolved into something much more disturbing, a glimpse into what now looked like a cult-like structure hidden behind the veneer of celebrity prestige. Jada's delivery remained calm, but resolute. She wasn't just revealing a secret, she was indicting a system. And the ripples of her words had only begun to spread. As Jada Pinkett Smith continued her testimony, it became increasingly clear that this was not merely a personal confrontation, it was a reckoning. Her calm delivery stood in stark contrast to the growing unease inside the courtroom. All eyes occasionally flicked toward Diddy, whose stoicism began to unravel under the mounting pressure. The emotional crescendo reached a new height when Jada revealed a moment from her past previously unknown to the public. In early 2016, she had quietly met with several prominent women in the music industry, among them Beyoncé and Solange. The gathering was informal, seemingly harmless, framed as a supportive conversation among peers. But at its core, Jada had one goal to warn them. If you ever receive anything about loyalty, legacy, or spirituality from Diddy, she had told them, walk away. No explanations. Just leave. She shared this in court not to implicate the women present, but to illustrate how far she had gone to protect others without fully revealing her own experience. Jada made it clear she never wanted to start a war. She wanted to quietly shield those around her from something she had barely escaped herself. But when the trial began, and the testimonies echoed her own haunting experience, she realized silence would only protect the abuser, not the victims. The prosecution then presented additional corroboration. Multiple production companies and media ventures tied to Diddy were now under scrutiny for leveraging similarly coercive contracts. Investigators were connecting dots across industries, noticing patterns of manipulation wrapped in spiritual or legacy-driven language. And it wasn't just the contracts. Jada described coded phrases used in industry circles: midnight circle the upstairs room, bring your aura. At first glance, they sounded like harmless metaphors. But in context, they were gatekeeping signals, indicators that someone was being initiated, tested, or watched. "I wasn't the only one approached," she told the jury. "I was just one of the few who said no and walked away." But even walking away didn't bring closure. Jada shared that for years she had endured silent intimidation. Unmarked phone calls, anonymous messages, even just a breath on the line. and always the feeling that she was being watched. She began avoiding certain events. She scrutinized guest lists. Her trust in the industry, already frayed, collapsed entirely. "I used to think staying quiet kept me safe," she admitted. "Now I know silence only keeps him powerful." Her final words in this phase of the testimony silenced the room. She turned to Diddy for the first time during the trial, locked eyes, and said, "You always told me I'd regret saying no, but look around. You're the one on trial, not me." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Diddy froze. The emotional tide of the courtroom had shifted. The silence that followed wasn't fear, it was accountability. As Jada Pinkett Smith stepped down from the witness stand, a heavy silence settled over the courtroom, a silence not of shock, but of awakening. Her words, restrained yet thunderous, had broken open a dam long held together by fear power and unspoken agreements. Outside the courthouse, the impact was immediate and far-reaching. Media headlines ignited within minutes. Jada speaks out. Dark pact exposed. You'll regret it in the next life. Social media surged with hashtags. Celebrities posted cryptic responses, some supportive, others evasive. Podcasters dissected her testimony word by word. Journalists began combing through old archives, uncovering interviews and public appearances that now took on new, disturbing subtext. The district attorney's office, emboldened by the resonance of Jada's statement, confirmed that additional subpoenas were being issued. They were expanding their investigation not just into Diddy, but into shell companies, private legal firms, and executive producers linked to his inner circle. A cultural mythos once dismissed as Hollywood gossip was being re-examined as a potential network of spiritual coercion and psychological control. One legal analyst on national television described it as potentially the most significant entertainment scandal since Weinstein, perhaps worse. What made this different, she explained, was the alleged spiritual overlay. Diddy wasn't just accused of control, he was accused of crafting an ideology, a metaphysical power structure meant to transcend even death. At the heart of it was the Watcher. The symbol, an eye inside a circle, appeared on multiple documents, each annotated with a similar, almost ritualistic script. According to Jada and other witnesses, it wasn't just an emblem. It was a warning, a brand, a guardian of silence. And now, with the testimony made public, that silence was finally fracturing. Jada, meanwhile, withdrew from the spotlight. She gave no interviews, posted nothing online. According to sources close to her, she was letting the testimony speak for itself. She said what she needed to say, one confidant told reporters. Now she wants the world to sit with it. But even in that silence, her words echoed. Celebrities began reaching out to prosecutors. Some who had previously refused to testify were now reconsidering. Production companies quietly began auditing their own legal departments. A streaming platform removed playlists linked to artists in Diddy's network. A fashion house pulled an ad campaign centered around his image. Jada's warning had landed. What few knew, however, was that she had tried to sound the alarm long before. At that private 2016 lunch, when she told Beyoncé and others to be wary, she wasn't just giving advice. She was hoping to prevent another entrapment. "He doesn't need your permission," she'd said. "He needs your compliance. And if you say no, you're not rejecting a man, you're rejecting a system." In court, that warning resurfaced. A journalist quoting a source close to Jada called it her quiet act of resistance, her attempt to protect without exposing. But now exposure was the only path forward. Jada's testimony had triggered more than legal inquiry. It sparked a cultural recalibration, one that questioned how deeply power could root itself when cloaked in charisma and myth. One by one, doors that had long remained closed were creaking open. Production executives, once silent, began whispering behind closed doors. Former collaborators dug out old folders. Artists who had once vanished from the public eye cautiously resurfaced, some with vague allusions to past agreements. The air in the industry had shifted. It no longer carried awe. It carried reckoning. And yet Jada said nothing more. Not to the media. Not on social media. Her final act was the act of silence, not one of fear, but of finality. Because in the vacuum left by silence, something else had emerged. Truth. And now the world was listening.